So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged, and this is the first scenario I think I've done since 0.96.1 came out, because it was the first one that I've put in the folder since then, so it's good to be back doing these again, because these are always quite interesting. They offer a little bit more variety than the standard maps, because often they play in a very different way to the sort of more generic ones that you see. Even the siege battles can often end up working in quite a similar way depending on which ones they are. Some maps can work out differently, but the scenarios are always custom made to go in a certain direction, and they can often turn out to be quite interesting indeed. So I believe this is a 4 versus 2, and this is from Heath Horton, who has made quite a lot of scenarios in the past. I think this is called AMON, which is not an actual place in Middle-earth, I don't believe, but even so, it's still good. I think the brightness is fine, but anyway, we'll go through the attacking armies first of all. And the player that sent this one to me was Dwayling, but I think I was actually sent this by 2 of the people who contributed to this one. But even so, not that it matters which one or which version I show. So we have him playing as Mordor, and of course, generally speaking in these scenarios, the orcs tend to make up the bulk of the attackers, because they are able to absorb a little bit more in terms of casualties, which allows for a little bit more of a cinematic experience, we should say. He's got some orc maulers here, which potentially could be very useful. Their AP damage can be very effective at dealing with certain situations, and they can offset the weak. In fact, there's a lot of AP damage that Mordor have available to them, because they also have the Moranon heavy maulers, which are of course the better version of the orc maulers. Very much a good shock infantry unit. There's also quite a lot of them in the unit at 203. Individually, they might not be able to match up to equivalent units from other factions, but the increased unit count means that they can more than hold their own in a situation where they can get into melee without being shot from a distance. We've also got the Moranon infantry over here with the armour upgrade, which is good to see. Obviously, pretty sturdy frontline unit for Mordor. They can be outclassed, of course, in terms of skill and just about anything by units from the kingdoms of men, elves or dwarves, but once again they offset this by having more men per unit, which kind of equalises things and could potentially be good if they can surround enemy units. But obviously, you know, the chances of them being able to surround the enemies when they take up a position on that hill over there is rather remote. It's got some fodder, of course. Mordor wouldn't be complete without a unit or 2 of fodder. Some orc javelins, which again, cheap javelin units can be very effective indeed, provided they can get into a good firing position. More heavy maulers, more maulers, and he's got some Moranon halberds again. Actually, no, the armour upgrade is just standard now for the Moranon units, isn't it? Never mind, so this is just a Moranon halberd unit. It's worth saying that there's only a few units which are shielded here for Mordor, which means they may run into a few issues when it comes to advancing into the arrow fire. The halberds and the axemen, however, do offer a lot of AP damage, which could potentially be useful depending on who the defending factions are. A couple more units of Moranon infantry, some Moranon archers, of course, and then back here, I assume we have the elites. So we do have the Black Legion of Barad-dûr, which in a situation where it looks like they're going to have to assault a hill up some narrow pathways, the Black Legion is going to be incredibly useful for pushing through those defences. And then over here, of course, we have one of the most scary infantry units in the game, the Temple Executioners with their armour upgrade. And then another unit of Black Legion, and then back there we have a unit of Minas Morgul's Chosen. We have some Sauron's Will, and then finally the General's Bodyguard unit is going to be some Melkor's Chosen. It's going to be, I'm not sure how it's going to go using cavalry in an offensive capacity in on this map, but we shall see. Moving over to here, where we are just in front of this lake over. It's a very nice looking map, actually, I must say, considering it's quite plain. We have another Mordor army, and starting with the elites at the back, we once again have some Black Legion of Barad-dûr. We have some Sauron's Will, and then just back here we have the Minas Morgul's Bodyguard. So again, you can see that they are slightly different with the red eye sort of painted on their blackened armour. Obviously, you're not going to have as much killing power as the Temple Executioners, but they do still offer a pretty good place to put your bodyguard. They are, of course, a shielded unit as well, which certainly helps. Orc javelins, Moranon heavy maulers. I imagine the composition is going to be relatively similar. And do we have Moranon infantry, orc maulers, Moranon halberds, orc fodder. He's actually got some Moranon guard as well as some orc archers, so this is actually a less elite army, but they do have some troll drummers to keep their units in line. And then over here we have 2 more armies, one of which is Second Pink, playing as the orcs of the Misty Mountains. He's got some heavy goblin archers here at the front. Heavy goblin infantry just in behind them, of course. Now the heavy goblin infantry is not as good as the Moranon infantry from Mordor, but it is more numerous. There are 253 in the unit, but obviously in terms of skill they do find themselves at a big disadvantage to most other equivalent units, but they make a pretty good target, all things considered, with their armour and their shield values. Heavy goblin halberdiers as well, which are not going to be as good as the Moranon halberds either, but once again they have numbers on their side. And just in here we have the Goblin King Bodyguard, which is very much an equivalent to the Minas Morgul Bodyguard we just saw. Now this is a unit which is potentially very useful in this sort of situation. The Cave Trolls are one of the fastest line breaker in the game. They can crush through defensive lines very quickly unless they are very thick. So we'll see how the Cave Trolls do, because they aren't as strong as some of the other trolls in a sustained fight, so if you use them at the wrong time they can end up dying before you can really take advantage of the holes they make. Heavy Goblin Spears, fantastic, you know, obviously very much a central unit to the Misty Mountains forces with their AP and the fact that they are spears which can push as well. Very good all-round unit, good centre to the Misty Mountains army. Mountain Uruk Blades over here, which is not actually a unit you'll find in the Misty Mountains any longer. It's been quite a while actually since they were removed. They are in sort of just the Rebels faction at the moment, which is where all of these sort of units which don't have a home go, so to speak. And yeah, the Mountain Uruk Blades will be making a return to this battle. They are better than the Heavy Goblin Infantry, but very much more of an equivalent actually to the Morannon Infantry. And then back here a couple of units of Black Uruks. And I think that's just about it for the Misty Mountains. So the final Orc army is going to be over here, and it's going to be another Orcs of the Misty Mountains force, and it's going to be commanded by Tangerine. Heavy Goblin Archers over here. He's actually got some Warg Riders as well, so they do have a cavalry force. So it'll be interesting to see if the defenders can sally out with any cavalry of their own. Some Mountain Oak Blades, a lot of Mountain Oak Blades actually. It'll be interesting to see how they perform and how their stats sort of match up to everything else now that they're technically not in any faction. We have some Heavy Goblin Halberds over here. A couple more units of Black Uruks. The White Uruk Fearmongers, which are a terrific unit, provided they can get into a sustained fight with their Halberds down. Another unit of Goblin King Bodyguard, and then of course the Snow Trolls. So let's have a look at the hillside position over here. There are a couple of ways up by the looks of things. Looks as though there is a pathway up here, another pathway which leads around perhaps. So essentially there's going to be a few roads up that they can take, and the defenders will have to try and keep a handle on everything. It's going to be difficult with all of these Orc armies, and the fact that it is only two defending armies, I believe. It'll be interesting to see what their composition is like. First of all, we have Heath Horton, who is playing as the Realm of Imladris. The Elder Harry Quinga are up here on the hill, of course, the heavy Elven Archer that is available to Imladris. Very, very good at range and in melee. You can only have one before the cost increases. They are certainly not the subject of my ire nowadays. Back when they used to be called the Elder Archers, of course, they weren't exactly my favourite, but now they have much more of a place. Over here we have the Noraturno Warriors, which are slightly better than the Eldar Quinga, mainly in melee capacity though. They are stronger in melee. At range they're very much an equivalent unit. They've got slightly better at range as well, but not to a hugely noticeable extent. Another unit of Elder Harry Quinga, so because this is a scenario they can have two rather than just the one that they would normally be laboured with. Imladris Guardians with the armour upgrade. Then we have Elder Haru Vital, several units of them in fact, as well as Elder Haru Masil. This is, seeing this many Elder units is only something you'll see in a scenario, because this would be horrendously expensive in a standard battle. Imladris Sentries as well, more Haru Vital and more Sentries, and then just in behind here we have more Guardians, some Blade Masters as well, some Gwathi Myrdain, which are of course formerly known as the Smiths of Eregion with those AP Warhammers, the Gwathi Arthan, the multiple HP Spears, and a High Elven Catapult, which has got a pretty good view. This is the road that looks like Tundra's Fox is going to have to take, and it's going to be very bad for him with the catapult right overhead. And some God Helim Einauer, which, is this the general? I think it is. So this obviously is a very good infantry archer hybrid. And that's pretty much it. There's some Noraturno Warriors as well, and some Elder Haru Quinga. And now the final army, which is Lothlorien, played by Donald Kingslayer. So I imagine it's going to be a very similar story here, with mostly elite units which have been massed up to the extent they wouldn't normally be able to. Some Lothlorien Sword Masters, of course, very much a more equivalent to the Imladris Blade Masters. The Elder Haru Masil are slightly higher tier than that. Lothlorien Axes, good attack values on these lads. Some Lothlorien Blades as well. This is a pretty chunky force. You can see over here the Galathram Nobles, good to see them, as well as the Maethir Ilaz Gellan. And Lothlorien Warriors, so again some more AP, which is going to be useful against all of these Orc factions. Lothlorien Blades, Axes, and some plentiful supplies of Lothlorien Archers as well. We have some Lothlorien Spears down here, and then this front line is going to be very difficult to force your way through. Lothlorien Spears backed up by the fearsome Karas Kaladon's Guardians. And then over here some Sindar Archers and some Lothlorien Archers. There's probably some hidden units around here as well. Lothlorien have got a higher contingent of hidden units than Imladris can field. So, I think I will make a little cut until the Orcs are in range, but we shall rejoin the battle when it starts. So I figure we may as well rejoin now, considering that the enemy, well, the Orc armies are already within bombardment range of the Elves. And interesting move here. I think this is a bit of a mistake actually to use the catapult on this army as it approaches, mainly because Tundra's Fox has done exactly the right thing here. Spread his entire army out into loose formation. You will hit this army because of the surface area that it covers with this catapult very easily, but the problem is you won't really get much in terms of kills, and even if you do hit, you'll probably kill like 3 units of Orc fodder, maybe few men in the unit of the Moranon Guard. Not really worth your time. It's much better. You'll be much better served saving your catapult and waiting until the enemy army bunches up, which they will have to on a map like this, because there are only a few ways up onto this hill that the Orcs can take, and that means, of course, if they're going to have any sort of success at all, they will need to try and bunch up and try and force their way through the front lines, because both Imladris and Lothlorien have got very elite armies, the sort that you would not see in a standard map. Now they are going after some of the Orc Maulers down here, or actually no, Moranon Halberds. Few decent hits, but again, they're not really going to be killing them to the extent that it's worth using this catapult for, so a little bit of a mistake early on here. You could even try targeting the Troll Drummers. It's less likely to hit them, but if you do, that's a big loss for Tundra's Fox. Now, meanwhile, you can see over here that there is a route up onto the hill over here, which has already been taken. And the heavy Goblin infantry is pouring forwards as they've used this road up the hill. There are several, I think Imladris has certainly got the more difficult angle to defend, because more of them are likely going to try and attack Imladris right from the off, whereas Lothlorien, if they're going to attack them, they'll need to go right around. But this is fine. Imladris are certainly of the Elven factions, they're probably the best at dealing with this amount of pressure, simply because they have the highest armor, the highest melee defense values overall, so they can sort of play this more grindy game better than perhaps the other elves can. Not that Lothlorien are bad at that, of course, but this unit of Imladris Guardians, rather than retreating back behind the polearm defensive line, they've decided to charge into these heavy Goblin infantrymen, which, all things considered, has gone quite well so far. The heavy Goblin infantry is already wavering, although this is a risky proposition, because if the heavy Goblin infantry is able to get in and around the Imladris Guardians, this will be a unit that Imladris has lost very early on here, which would have been very useful later on. The Imladris Guardians are one of the best sort of units that you can have more than one of before the cost increases in terms of line infantry. They are better than most others. I would say that there is a case for saying that they're the best, actually. They're certainly better than the Castamir's Legion and the Guardians of Khan Doom. The Lothlorien Blades are pretty close to them, but the fact that the Imladris Guardians have got higher defense values overall is probably more important for a unit of line infantry like this. Now, the problem that this unit of Imladris Guardians will have is that Tundra's Fox is advancing up behind them and could potentially surround them. Slowly but surely, however, these Imladris, well, not slowly at all, these Imladris Guardians are carving their way through this heavy Goblin infantry. But I do think maybe a little bit gung-ho to just send a single unit after them, and also Horton is unfortunately using his archers in a very... This is not exactly the most efficient use of his archers, because he's shooting his arrows right up into the air. They're not in a particularly good position to hit these heavy Goblin infantry, and even if they were, heavy Goblin infantry isn't really what you want to be using your very valuable arrows on anyway. Meanwhile, here come the Orc fodder, and this is going to be the thing which surrounds the Imladris Guardians. It is only Orc fodder, but being surrounded is... It imbues pretty stiff penalties onto you. So this is a bit unfortunate here for these Imladris Guardians. They will be overwhelmed in this situation. They will kill an awful lot of men, but overall I'd say it's a bit of a waste. I mean, the Elves cannot afford to throw any of their units under the bus here. They've got a big numbers disadvantage here, and it's this sort of play is the sort of thing which is not going to help that at all. You can see the Imladris Guardians. It says victory is a distinct possibility, but they will be worn down slowly and surely. I don't think actually there are layers to this. Actually, it is more of a siege than anything else. This, because there are sort of several fallback points where the defenders can go back to other choke points, sort of higher up the hill, as it were. But this is going to be a very tricky defensive line to break through, in spite of the fact those Imladris Guardians are all at sea over there. The Elder Enway Harry Hatal and Imladris sentries in formation is going to be a very difficult proposition to try and break down, especially for Tundra's Fox, whose majority of his first wave is going to consist of lower tier units like the Moranon Guard and of course the Orc fodder. But once again we see this waste from Imladris. The Elder Enway Harry Quinger's ammo just not being used efficiently at all, which is a real shame to see. You know, especially seeing as they're going after orc fodder as well. It pains me to see, you know, ammunition wasted in such a way. Meanwhile, the Imladris Guardians' victory is still a distinct possibility. I mean, they are starting to lose unit models, but overall, eventually these goblins and orcs will wear these guys down. And also you can see that around the other side, Tangerine and his Misty Mountains army is going to be attacking the rear position over here, which has been taken up by Lothlorien. Lothlorien also shooting on the approach, but again, a lot of these shots are going awry, and it's not exactly into targets which are worth going after. I mean, with your infantry forces from Lothlorien and Imladris, you can essentially absorb the first wave no problem at all. Your arrows, it's really not worth going after stuff like goblin infantry and orc fodder, especially when you don't even have a good shot on them. Very unfortunate, but having said that, these Imladris Guardians are certainly doing their best in this last stand situation they find themselves in. They've definitely carved their way through a lot of heavy goblin infantry, and they will continue to do damage to both the units that they have been surrounded by, but they will ultimately be brought down. Indeed. Going after the trolls now, which is a little bit more understandable, but once again, it's still not a particularly good shot. You need to sort of position yourself onto a bit of elevated ground where you have a straight shot, and then you're going to be doing a lot of damage very quickly to them. But in this situation, the accuracy is all gone, unfortunately. The orc archers are moving into position, presumably to try and skirmish down the elven defensive line. There's no real need for that from the orcs' perspective. I mean, the heavy goblin archers are also going to be trying to skirmish down the Imladris sentries. That kind of goes against the spirit of things here, I think. I think there's no need to try hard to that extent. I feel as though, you know, the whole point behind this is that we have a nice battle where the defensive lines crash together and such, rather than this sort of approach where the archers are just sort of shooting at point blank because they don't want to go in and actually attack the elves and take them head on. That's a little bit unfortunate, but regardless, it's the smart thing to do, but it's definitely not the fun thing to do. Still, what's going on over here? Ah, there is another way up onto this area over here, and Tundra's Fox has sort of split his army, so he's going to be going up both avenues. The Orc Javelins are trying to move into position, and honestly, in this sort of situation, the Lothlorien Axes and Swordmasters could probably counter-attack down the hill, and they would carve their way through Orc Javelins and Orc Fodder all day long. This is a very narrow pathway as well, so it's not even as if he'd be able to reinforce with more elite units all that quickly. We'll see if Donald Kingslayer does that. Meanwhile, we have the Goblin Infantry, which is here on the front. They're already shaken after taking arrow fire from the Sindar Archers on the approach. Needless to say, the Goblin Infantry is not really going to make too much of a dent in the front line, which comprises itself of Karas Galadhon's Guardians and Lothlorien Axes. The Lothlorien Archers are also moving into position ready. Mountain Uruk Blades are coming up, more arrow fire coming in to the Heavy Goblin Archers, and they are not in a particularly good position to deal with that, so they should be skirmished down nice and efficiently. Meanwhile, interesting little trench here, but what's going on here on the front line? Yeah, these Heavy Goblin Archers have taken some pretty hefty skirmish damage. I'm surprised that Horton has not moved these Eldarenwe Haru Masil out of the way, because they've just been stood there like lemons taking fire more or less point blank from these Heavy Goblin Archers, and the Eldarenwe Haru Masil are not the sort of unit you want to lose to incompetence, because they're so effective when they're on the front line. They're such a good two-handed sword unit, and they could be extremely useful against the elves in this situation. Now, the Imladris Guardians are still fighting over here technically, although they are now very much surrounded and slowly but surely being crushed. They did well for themselves, but ultimately I don't think that this was a worthwhile trade for Imladris. The Heavy Goblin Infantry and the Orc Fodder. You know, the Orcs are going to be throwing them away for much lesser goals than taking out a unit for free, essentially. Moran on guard is moving up. The Orcs are just sort of waiting in position. I'm not sure what they're waiting for. I mean, I assume they're just trying to skirmish down as much as they can. But at this point, I mean, look at the amount of manpower they have. I mean, it's very clear that in this sort of situation, the attackers usually have the advantage when they have a one-army advantage. Here they have a two-army advantage, and I'm a little bit disappointed in the fact that they seem so intent on resorting to this sort of thing. Having said that, Horton is allowing them to by simply leaving his important units here, right in the view line of these archers, allowing them to get nice value off a very cheap unit, relatively speaking. the Elder Harry Masil has charged forward, and they are going to be going into battle against the Moran Guard. Of course, there's only going to be one winner in that situation. Once again, however, this unit of Elder is effectively fighting on its own. This defensive line here is not joining in the fight, although I think they will be pulled into it now by the Orc fodder of Tundra's Fox, so the Elder Haru Hatal should be joining in. Elder units are, of course, extremely powerful, but there is a lot of Orcs here, and Orton needs to be careful. He needs to be a little bit more organised than he has been up to this point. He needs to make sure that his entire line is engaging, so that the enemy is forced to engage his entire line, rather than sort of allowing the enemy to focus on individual points and wear him down. Because if this turns into a pure battle of attrition, there's only going to be one winner there. Meanwhile, Donald Kingslayer has indeed charged down the hill, and that's good to see. So the Lothlorien Swordmasters and the Lothlorien Axes will, of course, crush these Orc fodder beneath their feet. Just in behind there, we can see that there is actually the Minas Morgul bodyguard, so Tundra's general is fairly nearby. And even the Minas Morgul bodyguard will struggle against the Swordmasters. The Swordmasters and the Axes, very powerful, and this is a nice position to be in. Some of the arrows are going into the side of the cliff, but most of them, I think, are finding their target in this big blob of Orcs, so good defensive setup here from Lothlorien. Meanwhile, over here, looks like we've arrived just in time to see the start of Tangerine's assault on the rear of the hill. Now, obviously, the Karas Galadhon's Guardians should hold relatively steadfast, although there is a little bit of a gap there where some of the Mountain Oak Blades got around. I'm a little bit confused as to why these Karas Galadhon's Guardians moved forward without the support of their spears. We'll see. There's some Maitha Ilaz Galan up on the hill. Did they break already? Unknown, I suppose, but even so, with only one unit, they will break before the Karas Galadhon's Guardians get attacked in the rear anyway. And this is a fairly meagre force, just a sort of probing attack, I suppose. The rest of Tangerine's force is still lagging a little bit further behind. But let's return to the front line, which I assume this is very much a scenario-like situation now, where the frames drop whenever I go close to the battle itself. The Elder Haru Masil continue to push into these lower-tier Orc units, the Orc fodder, of course, being butchered by them. The Moranon Halberds are on the front line as well, which actually would be, pretty useful against Imladris due to the higher armor values of Imladris overall. However, the Moranon Guard are also finding themselves in battle with the Imladris Sentries and Haru Hatal, which is clearly not going to go well for them. Catapult shots there in the background, crashing into the Moranon infantry, causing more attritional casualties. Heavy Goblin infantry. Just sort of waiting here. They're not engaging the entire Elven line, which again is wise, because if they try to engage the full extent of the Elven line, they will allow, a gap has been found in the Elven defences, and this is the problem that Imladris are going into. They committed some of their line forwards, but not all of it. And this means that there was going to be gaps that appeared, and this is unfortunate really on the part of Orton. And now the Black Legion of Barad-dûr is also moving forward, Dwaylen committing forward his Great Shield unit, which is exactly the right thing to do. I mean, I can't fault the Orcs for their tactics here, because they've taken full advantage of the mistakes so far that has been made by Imladris. And as soon as things started to go south here, there was a case saying Imladris should have pulled back, but ultimately their inefficient use of their skirmishers, which as the elves is a criminal offence really, was always going to be a real problem, and it's still happening. You can still see the arrows just sort of coasting into the top of the Orc lines, but it's not really focused, and that's the real problem that they're having to deal with here. And I don't know if the Elven front line is going to survive this. You can see that the Black Legion of Barad-dûr are just pushing through, and even with another unit of Elder Haru Masil, this is probably going to go very poorly for them. The Black Legion will of course lose to the Elder but it's the gap that they've made which is the real problem. And now if they commit forward more infantry units, the Elven front line is going to be overwhelmed, and at this point you can see over here, these units are just sort of stood here. I mean, this is the moment now where you either pull these units back or commit them. Just making them stand there is just adding to your woes. We'll check back in on that in a minute. Meanwhile, I can't imagine there's too much of a change over here. I mean, it's a very grindy fight. More and more of the Orcs are being committed forward, Orc Maulers as well. But in response to this, Lothlorien has also committed forward a unit of Staff Masters with their armour upgrade. They are AP, so they should inflict some casualties on the Orcs, but mainly they will be there for their very high melee defense and their melee tar pit capabilities. Meanwhile, the Pikes have once again formed up a flat line, which is not going to be circumvented by the Orcs again. A few units of heavy Goblin Archers still firing away. But this second assault looks like it's going to be much more concerted from Tangerine. There's a lot more men on the front lines now, which should pose a little bit more of a threat to Lothlorien's position back here. Meanwhile, clearly where the main event is happening right now is over here on the front of the hill, so to speak. And the Black Legion's assault has slightly petered out, but there is still this huge gap here, which the Orcs, if they poured through this, it would be game over, I think. I think that the Orcs would have victory this day. But it looks as though a lot of the army was actually lagging a little bit further behind, so the reinforcements were not on hand to deal with that as quickly as maybe they could have been. The Eldarenway Haru Masil that were committed forward are still slicing their way through Orcs, but they are starting to run out of steam now. Now we have this unit of Eldarenway Haru Hatal which has moved, and immediately it looks as though Tundra's Fox has noticed that and he's going to put his Orc Archers up on the hill over there. Eldarenway Haru Hatal trying to shore up this front line, but so far it's been a bit of a disaster here on the Imladris front for the Elves. The Orcs have played this perfectly and there have been mistakes from the defenders. This phalanx in the middle is still holding very strong. The Eldarenway Haru Hatal in shield wall, of course, are very difficult to break through from the front. But the Orcs have done the right thing by not really fully engaging them from the front and instead trying to circumvent the situation as best they can. Now the Black Legion are breaking at this point, and the reinforcements from the Orcs were not on hand quickly enough, which is probably the first noticeable mistake I've seen from them here. You know, Tundra's Fox can't be expected to do everything over on this front, and now Dwayling is moving up some of his forces, but he needed to be quicker, I think. You know, his own Black Legion were the ones which made the gap, and he could have put this game to bed already, I think. Because if the Elves had lost this front line without putting up more resistance than they had, this game would have been easily going in favour of the Orcs. But as it is, Horton's been given a lifeline here. We'll see if he can take it. Meanwhile, you can see up here that they are trying to take advantage of the gap that the Eldarenway left for them. Heavy Goblin infantry engaging with the Imladris sentries, but also these Orc Archers up on the hillside now, trying to attack into the secondary Imladris defensive position. But in a skirmish fight with the Elves, the Orc Archers in the position that they're in, not exactly going to go in their favour. Let's go back over to the very narrow pathway up here, which Tundra's Fox is taking full responsibility for. The Elves still just waiting in position, blocking the Orc advance. Now, interestingly enough, we do have Tundra's Fox's Black Legion moving up here. Now, the Black Legion can push through, but this is a lot they have to push through. We'll see how well that goes. There is those Maitha Ilaz Gelen as well, ready to reinforce should the need arise. Now we have the Snow Trolls have been committed forward, which is bold. A good move, perhaps, against this level of pikemen. But the Sindar Blade Masters revealed themselves, reinforcing the front line, and it looks as though this Lothlorien front line is going to hold relatively easily in the face of Tangerine's assault. This front line was obviously a lot narrower, so it's a lot easier to keep track of it here on the part of Donald Kingslayer. But his front line was also very well crafted, and it's going to be very difficult for the Misty Mountains to effect any sort of advance. There's Mountain Orc Berserkers ready to reinforce, but we'll see. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how Tangerine copes with this. Over on the other side, however, things are going much better for the Orcs, as we've said. They haven't taken full advantage of the opportunities afforded to them, and we shall see. I mean, this is really a glowing endorsement of the Eldarenway units, and it really goes to show why, you know, they are so expensive to the point where you don't really see whole armies of Eldarenway anymore, because they are capable of turning a fight around. Although at this point, Tundra's Fox once again is seeing a gap and going for it, so these Moranon infantry will be able to circumvent the defence, and then presumably they're going to roll up the line. Now over here we can see the Cave Trolls have been committed forward, which is an interesting move. I perhaps would have saved them for later on one of the front lines, where, because really the line has already been broken over here. You can see that now the Orcs are starting to roll up the line. Moranon infantry is in and behind the Elven front line, so it's only a matter of time before the first Imladris line falls. And the cave trolls perhaps would have been better spent later on. On this front line over here, the Gwathi Arthand and Lothlorien blades, the cave trolls would have cut through them easily, and then they could have caused some havoc in behind the Elven front lines. Some misses there from the Elven catapult again. This is not the best angle for the Elven catapult. I think that the main problem that Imladris have had so far is they've just been content to fire their ammunition where they can. But you need to be a little bit more careful about it in this situation. You need to use your ammunition very wisely, and I feel as though Imladris kind of haven't. Goblin King bodyguard here. I mean, the cave trolls are smoothing out this process, certainly. There was a bit of friendly fire there. One of the cave trolls did fall, but it also hit the Elder Enway, and they are now shaken. Even the Elder Enway can break if the situation is bleak enough. It says defeat is a distinct possibility for these orcs, but obviously that will change. The elves fully surrounded, and the first Imladris line has fallen. There's a lot of dead orcs here, though. I mean, if we have a look at the percentage of kills, the orcs are 10 percentage points behind, but it is early days yet, of course, and generally speaking, 10% is a gap that we've seen the attackers make up time and time again, like in the last fight against the elves as they defended. Defeat is almost a certainty. Mountain blades being committed forward from second pink, charging into the back of these Elder Enway units. I mean, this is a situation now when the archers are going to be able to do a lot of damage, because there's a nice clear shot that they've got into the back of these Mountain blades. So we'll see if that turns out to be a big factor or not. What's going on here? It looks as though the Black Legion have wreaked some havoc over here. There's actually a little pathway over here where they push some of the forces in. But time will tell whether they can actually force that all the way through. They started off with 203 men in the unit, now they've only got 74. So I think they have managed to push them back, but they haven't managed to push them back out of this choke point fully yet. So I guess not exactly, you know, better than Tundra's Fox would have feared, perhaps, but not as well as he'd have hoped. The Sindar Blade Masters once again shoring up the line, coming out of hiding. There's still a lot of forces from Tundra's Fox over here, though, so I'm not sure whether Lothlorien will be able to hold this choke point forever. It kind of depends on how well his front line's doing against Tangerine. And he has had to commit forward another unit of Lothlorien warriors. His Karas Kalaton's Guardians still holding firm, as well as these Lothlorien spears, yeah. This is probably the area where the orcs have fared the worst so far. This is a very difficult ask for Tangerine to get through this defensive position, to be fair. Lothlorien have done very well thus far in just sort of shutting him down, and he's now having to send forward some of his more elite units. The Blackback Mountain Berserkers are heading forward, more Halberdiers. But still, the main problem for the elves is going to be over here. The Elder Enway are still fighting away, but ultimately there aren't going to be enough of them. The Elder Enway Harry Masil doing their best. Oof. Catapult getting a nice hit there on the Goblin Infantry. Heavy Goblin Infantry, I should say. The Sauron's Will running around as well. These pockets of Elven resistance are going to fall. There's a lot of Elder Enway that they've managed to deal with as well, and only a few elite units from the Orcs have been committed. Sauron's Will is running around here. The Cave Trolls, I think, are going to back away in the situation. These Troll Drummers have also been a godsend for the Orcs. It's kept some of their units in melee where perhaps they would have broken, and it's been a bit of a headache for the elves to have to continue to fight so many orcs without them breaking. Heavy Goblin Archers getting into position, skirmishing, doing some damage to those Imladris Blade Masters, of course. They've got good armor values, but not very good shield values. Well, non-existent shield values. And these Elder Enway continuing to fight as best they can. They are spears, of course, so they're not exactly designed to get kills all that quickly. That would be the job of the Heru Masil, who have largely been destroyed at this point. They still have a unit over here of 38 in combination with the spears, but ultimately they are going to fall away. Simply too many orcs, but Imladris have at least fallen back to a secondary defensive position, which they needed to do. This front line was not a particularly great engagement for them. We shall see if they do better in this secondary line. Unfortunately, there are two ways up here. This frontal one here, guarded by the Lothlorien Blades and the Gwathi Arthand, and then over here, another unit of Karas Kaladon's Guardians with a lot of Lothlorien units, so Donald Kingslayer's forces. They're going to have to do a lot of heavy lifting here in the late game. Imladris have certainly taken the bulk of the Elven losses thus far, Oh, and there's another way up over here as well, which is being guarded by the Gwaith y Myrdain. Still the arrows fly. See how Tangerine is getting on. And his goblin horde at trying to crack through this Lothlorien front line. And so far so good for Lothlorien. They've held very firmly here. The Carasgalad Guardians have started to take some losses, so their HP has probably been expended. And I would assume that the Blackback Mountain Berserkers are probably waiting for a better opportunity when the line is perhaps a little bit weaker. There's also more Black Uruks, White Uruks, Goblin King's Bodyguard. I'm not sure whether this is going to be enough to hold back the entirety of what's left of the Misty Mountains. Especially considering if this front line gets weak enough, the Warg Riders will be able to charge through it, and then that would be a real problem for the Elves. They do still have these Lothlorien Archers as another unit they've got in reserve. We shall see how that goes. Let's go and see how Tundra's Fox is getting on over here. Looks as though the Elves have actually started to push the Orcs back again over here. There's Elder Enway, Heru Quinga over here as well. But Maetha Ilazgelen have largely been destroyed, but the Lothlorien Archers and the Sindar Blade Masters fighting well, and there go the Orc Archers, routing and broken. The Sylvan Staff Masters are presumably going to return to the line. They were cut off a little bit after the push from the Black Legion of Barad-dûr. And overall, actually, I think Lothlorien have been completely and utterly victorious over here. Indeed, they have been. So this is good for the Elves. This frees up a decent chunk of resources that they can now allocate elsewhere. Sindar Archers. There's a lot of good forces that they can now put elsewhere, which they're going to need, because on every other front line they're going to need more resources to stop the advance here, I think, of the Orcs. Goblin infantry moving forwards. The Elder Enway are still trying to put up a fight here, which is, again, it really does go to show how good these units really are. But ultimately, it's going to be a Pyrrhic victory for them. They've killed a lot of Orcs, but they too will be dying this day. And those Heru Masil are the only ones left. The Heru Hatal have been completely destroyed. Cave Trolls, of course. Now, the Orcs have still got resources that they've got at the foot of the hill there, so they've still got plenty to bring. There's also Melkor's Chosen, so yeah, a lot of good resources left. Ooh. Now that was a very good hit from the catapult. That was what they needed more of, to be fair. Good use of that ammunition. They're going to need more of that moving forwards. We'll see how well this goes, but this front line, it's going to be tricky. You know, there are elite Elven units here, but the Orcs have still got elite units of their own. This fight down here could well prove to be a very important one now. And you can see now that the heavy Goblin halberds, are there spears in there as well? I would assume there are, because they're pushing through using their pure mass here. And now the Wargs are also moving through. They're going to try and break through this front line and just shatter it completely. And some of those Mountain Orc Berserkers have managed to get through. This could be disastrous for the Elves. This could be where they lose the battle. There are Galathran nobles over here. They're going to need to commit themselves to this fight now, before their front line falls, or before they take so much damage that they're going to have to leave. I mean, these Warg Riders, they can't really afford to stick around here too long, because if they get caught by the pikes, they're going to fall away very quickly indeed. But the Wargs have to pull back. The time was not right for them, but the Misty Mountains have definitely caused a noticeable dent here in the middle of the Lothlorien position, and the Black Uruks of the mountains certainly helping with that. Better equipped to deal with an Elven threat than most other Misty Mountains units. The Galathran nobles are now moving in to the front line. They are, of course, I believe they are the strongest Lothlorien unit in melee as well as at range. We shall see. Those Wargs are going to try and get around. Now this does put them at risk of being caught on the pikeman, which, needless to say, will kill them off very, very quickly. But this is an important engagement, because if Tangerine manages to break through, then the Orcs will be able to have an advantage on two fronts. I'm not sure what they're doing, allocating more resources over here. I mean, Tundra's Fox has got Orc Archers down here, but this is something which Donald Kingslayer can easily deal with his Lothlorien Archers. At this point, I suppose they could be trying to get up onto this hill, but they need to reinforce this front line over here. Otherwise, things are going to go south for the Elves very, very quickly. These Lothlorien archers getting into position, forming up a secondary line again. And the Mount Orc Berserker is traditionally not a good unit against the elves. Lower skill, sort of AP axe units. The sort of things which the elves usually eat for breakfast, but in combination with everything else, performing a very important role, some of them managing to break through. But at this point, I think the Misty Mountains should sort of cut their losses and accept the ground that they've gained. Because if they throw too many more units away, they could end up struggling a little bit, because these Karas Galadhon's Guardians are still shoring up this section of the line, and with the Galathram Nobles it's unlikely that they're going to be able to kill them off with anything other than their blackbacks. Well, the White Uruk Fearmongers might be able to in Phalanx. We shall see. And it looks... I'm not entirely sure what's going on thus far. A lot of rearrangement going on here from the elves. Meanwhile, the assault is being prepared over on the other side, but it has not yet begun. It looks as though Lothlorien is making up the bulk of this defence as well, so it does go to show how much Imladris lost in that initial engagement. Goblin King's bodyguard moving forward, a multiple HP unit from Tangerine, and they're pushing their way through. And Azog has managed to avoid getting caught on the pike, so they won't lose their general as a result of this. Lothlorien archers here. The Galathram nobles, of course, continuing to carve their way through. With these Goblin King bodyguard pushing their way through, another unit is going to be required down here to shore this line up. And now the Blackbacks are coming in, so Tangerine's gone all in. The Warg Riders are also pushing forward. This is basically the entirety of his army. One more unit down here might be enough to secure it, and the Gwathi Myrdain are coming down here, so a good choice. Another multiple HP unit, a spear unit no less as well, so even if the Wargs do get through, if the spears manage to stop them, also the Wargs are like going right into the pikes over here, which is not exactly the best idea for them. They are going to get through, but they will have taken a huge amount of attritional casualties on the way through. The Gwathi Myrdain are here, but the Wargs have managed to get through. Now, if they have any arrows left alive, the elves need to stop these Wargs from rampaging as quickly as possible, because if they don't, then this could be the killing blow. It would be really unfortunate if they did not have any ammunition left. I'm not sure they do, because these Wargs charging into the Eldarenwe Haru Quinga, very nice charge. And again a little bit of carelessness, I have to say, to let the Wargs through the line. I mean, it should have been obvious that this line was failing a little bit and they needed to reinforce it, but too slow, and they could end up paying the ultimate price for this. I mean, the Wargs actually do break, and it is rather fortunate that the Imladris Blade Masters were here, because of course they do have an anti-cavalry bonus. Now, let's see. Moranon heavy... Wait a minute, what's going on over here? The Gwathi Arthand... Oh no, the Gwathi Myrdain are the AP, aren't they? The Arthand are the spears. They're surrounded. Now this... Oh dear. Yeah, this is really careless. Leaving the Gwathi Arthand of all things behind. That's very, very poor from Imladris. This is a unit which could have been absolutely invaluable in the late game because of their ability to hold the line, and they've been utterly wasted. Because they're just going to suffer the same fate as Imladris' front line previously. What's going on over here? Slowly but surely, Lothlorien's front line is being eroded. And again, this does mean that this unit of Gwathi Myrdain was essentially sent into the fight to die, because they will be overwhelmed by a combination of Black Uruks of the Mountain, Goblin King Bodyguard, and Blackback Mountain Berserkers. Mismanagement and waste is how I would describe the Elven defence thus far. All of their defensive lines, other than the one that was put up by Donald Kingslayer over here, and initially against Tangerine, have been real disasters. Gaps left all over the place. And in a situation like this, I may sound like I'm being harsh, but you can't afford mistakes in a situation like this, because if you're in a situation where you're two armies against four, one mistake could be enough to lose you the battle, but there have been several so far. Which is unfortunate, because I do feel as though the Elves had a chance in this fight. They had the elite units to be able to deal with this situation, and they obviously had a very fine defensive position potentially, but poor play. Less so from Lothlorien, I must say. Lothlorien initially did a good job, but lack of communication, perhaps. Heru Quinga. Again, they've been essentially left behind to die. A rearguard action is all well and good, but so far the entirety of the Imladris army that we've seen fighting has been left as sacrificial pawns. Of all armies, you would expect Imladris not to be such. The Galathrun nobles' victory still seems certain for them, to be fair. Still fighting away, although they're not the ones fighting against the elites. And you can see how quickly the Gwathi Myrdain, you know, they charged into the lion's jaws, essentially. And they were destroyed. Those Blackback Berserkers really proving their worth. Very, very strong offensive unit. The strongest that Misty Mountains has available to them. And that's pretty much the entirety of Tangerine's army, so it has cost him most of his army, but he has also bled them of several of their elite units. The Galathrun nobles will fall here eventually, as will the Gwathi Myrdain, and of course one of the units of Karas Galadhon's Guardians also suffered a grisly fate. You can see over here the Gwathi Arthan victory still seems certain for them. However, eventually they will fall, of course. They're surrounded by AP units. And the problem with them, of course, is that they are spears, so they won't kill off units quite as quickly as other elite units would. So they won't be able to get rid of the vast majority of this AP around them as quickly as maybe they would like. And then over here we can see the Elder Runway Heru Quinga have been broken. By Goblin Infantry, no less. And what are they fighting over here? Wait a minute, what the hell's going on? Wait. Oh, I see. There are individual units of Noritina warriors. I thought that the troll drummers had gone berserk and had started hitting their own halberdiers over the head. Now then. Let's see if all of this waste was worth it in this final stand situation here. Lothlorien blades, Heru Quinga, spears, and Karas Galadhon's Guardians on the front line, backed up by Blade Masters, potentially the High Elven Catapult, several units of another unit of Lothlorien spears, some God Helene, and then some sort of smattering of Lothlorien units over here. Lothlorien blades as well. They don't have a hyper elite unit really other than the God Helene that's left. And that's bad news because I know for a fact that Dwayling will still have his Temple Executioners. Elite units are of course not the be all and end all, but they are of course linchpins of attacks and defences. And this is not a good sight to see either. Another unit of Black Legion. As soon as the front line has been worn down just a little bit, the Black Legion could push their way through, cause some havoc, raise some hell, and that will likely be the end. I can't imagine the elves are going to get out of this with their lives. And at this point the orcs have pulled... Well, actually no. It's dead even. But if it's dead even at any point before the 90% mark, generally speaking, the defenders are doomed. They do have a lot of... You know, the forces they have left are of good quality, and I was lying, the Karas Galadhon's Guardians are another unit that's hyper elite, I suppose. But they simply don't have enough resources left, and the orcs have got plenty. Look at this over here. Gwathi Arthans, you know, they could fight their way out of this, I suppose, but there's no way for them to get back to the final stand that the elves have put up. And again, this would have been such a good unit to have in a final stand situation. Again, they don't kill very quickly, but their ability to hold the line is second to none in the Imladris roster, really. Other than the sentries, but pikes are a little bit different. And again, the orcs using what skirmishes they have left to try and inflict some minor damage onto the Elven front line. Again, I don't really begrudge them that at this point. They've already won the battle in my view. I'd be exceptionally surprised if the Owls managed to pull this back at this point. Oh, what's going on? Some Morannon infantry were sent in to support. They're going to need more though. And indeed, Tundra's Fox is going to send over a unit of Morannon Halberds to just sort of keep up the pressure on this one Elven unit as they continue to fight for their lives. Multiple HP, high defense units, they're very difficult to bring down. Goblin Infantry, the first one's in. I'm not sure whether this has been intentional, but if it has been, then it's been very clever what the attackers have done. They've engaged individual sections of line and they've drawn them out, and then they've attacked with more genuine threats. And it's a very savvy thing to do, because I think, you know, what the elves haven't done is when they've surely seen this happening, they haven't then reinforced quickly enough. They haven't moved their front line up to try and counter-attack into the orcs. You can't just sit there and expect your defensive line to hold, because now you can see they've been drawn out just a little bit, little gaps have appeared, and now the Morannon halberds are moving in to form a front line, and there's a gap over here which the Sauron's Will could potentially deal with, could potentially exploit. Sylvan Staff Masters are moving forward, and at this point this time the elves have noticed, I believe, the fact that the gap has formed, and the Heruquinga are going to plug that gap. But even so, it's good play from the attackers. It's when you're dealing with a very solid defensive line, it's a good thing to do, because as we saw earlier on in the map when Imladris fell afoul of it, sometimes the defenders don't correct what they're doing. Heavy Goblin Spears moving in, right into the jaws of the Karas Galadhon's Guardians, followed up by the Blackbacks actually, so all of Tangerine's forces are just sort of throwing themselves into yet another unit of Guardians. Oh, there's a tree. Another unit of Lothlorien Spears. The Lothlorien Infantry, of course, very effective at killing off its foes. And now here comes the Black Legion, so this could be the moment where the battle gets away from the defenders. Final 10,000 frames, which is a decent amount of time left, all things considered, so I would imagine actually that this unit of Black Legion might not be sufficient. These Heavy Goblin Spears are pushing forward though. This is a huge amount of mass that they're using to just push through. The elves are going to try and hold the line. Heavy Goblin Spears. Obviously a lot of them are going to die from doing this, especially when they start getting attacked by the Blade Masters. Once again, the orcs have played this very smartly. Goblin King Bodyguard charging to the side of the Karas Galadhon's Guardians. Interestingly enough, the Black Legion have not actually pushed forward all that much. They need to continue pushing, because at this point the Elven front line, while it is very much dented, it is still holding. There are the Troll Drummers. Heruquinga moving in, presumably to try and reinforce a section of the line. Another unit of Imladris Guardians as well, so this is, you know, this line is where the elves are going to live and die. Interestingly enough, they have held. And, you know, this Black Legion is not pushing forward to the extent that it needs to. Now, it has essentially cracked the pike formation, but it has not pushed through the line entirely. The Heavy Goblin Spears have pushed through more, actually, interestingly enough. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the line, lower tier units have been committed forward. Sauron's Will from Tundra's Fox has moved in. Orc Javelins are going to move forward to throw their payloads. Minas Morgul Chosen moving up. I mean, at this point you may as well commit your Temple Executioners, to be honest. Otherwise they're not going to be able to get any kills. Karas Galadhon's Guardians have taken some damage. Lothlorien Swordmasters, again, battered units are now being sent forward to try and hold the line. But this is going to be the end of the Elven resistance, you would think. Defeat is almost a certainty for the Black Legion, and again, the Black Legion, that was not exactly the best mass push I've seen. The Heavy Goblin Spears did a better job than them in this situation. I feel as though it perhaps would have been a better idea to sort of push next to the Heavy Goblin Spears rather than with them, so that the whole line got pushed back, but easy to say in hindsight. Morannon Archers being committed forward, just a sea of orcs, and again Minas Morgul Chosen being pushed forward as well. Very tough to bring down. The orcs do need to keep up this assault, however. They can't afford to let up. Indeed, it's still dead even, but eventually you'd imagine that when a gap appears, the elves are doomed, and it's probably going to happen over here. The Black Legion is still trying to push, but their unit is stretched a little bit. A few of the pikemen sort of trapped and marooned. Halberds, Goblin King Bodyguard, Minas Morgul Chosen. All of these Axemen and Sauron's Will and all these AP units. It's fortunate that they're fighting Imladris and not Linden, Heruquinga, trying to hold the line on their lonesome, and that won't happen against this level of AP troops. I mean, you've got Sauron's Will there, which are of course a pretty decent unit in their own right. More Black Uruks are just pouring forward now. Morannon archers firing away. What's going on over here? Are they still fighting these Gwaith? Well, that's where the Temple Executioners were, finishing off the Gwaith Arthan. Good move, just to finish off this final pocket of Elven resistance that isn't on their little hillside. Arrows continue to fly into the defensive lines. Black Legion running out of steam a little bit. They need some reinforcements over here actually at this point. Are they going to be forthcoming? I mean, they've got plenty in reserve. More Sauron's Will. Obviously a lot more heavy goblin halberdiers as well. Ooh. Sylvan Staff Masters continuing to fight on the front lines as well. Difficult to, obviously, very much the melee target of Lothlorien. Not quite to the same extent that the Barrow Wights are for Angmar, but very high melee defense. But against overwhelming odds like this, still the arrows continue to fly. And the javelins as well. Sindar archers are now on the front line, again a difficult unit to break down, but they are the target of the javelins, so that will certainly hasten their demise. You can see that the Tangerine's Goblin King bodyguard again managed to wriggle their way through, and they will now recharge the Sindar archers, again just proving to be a little bit more of a headache for them. The Elven front line is breaking. Something that I have noted throughout this battle is how well the Elven spears have managed to hold, and elsewhere in the Elven line where the spears weren't, they struggled a lot to deal with the sheer mass of the orcs that were bearing down upon them. The Sauron's Will now wriggling their way through as well. This is the problem with relying on a defensive line. The catapult crew is going to try and stop their advance. Needless to say, they will not last too long in the face of an elite shock unit. Still some Karas Galadhon's Guardians alive, only 3 of them, but still. White Uruk Fearmongers here on the front line. Again, more AP. Morannon Halberds moving forward, that's pretty neat to see all those pole arms moving up the field in a cloud of dust. Or hill, I should say, not field. The Lothlorien spears doing their best to hold the line, but slowly and surely they are being dragged down. Interestingly, a fairly decent amount of time still remaining. I mean, this should be the unit which finally drives the point home that the elves are going to lose. The Temple Executioners are moving forward. The elves have got nothing left which can stand against them. The Masters of all they survey. And interestingly enough, you just see out there the Melkor's Chosen. They have done absolutely nothing in this battle. They've been taking it easy. Now it seems like they are finally deigning to climb the hill. There goes Haldir. Interestingly enough, I've lost track of the God Helene. There's Azog. He actually managed to survive contact with the Sindar archers. That's not bad. Where are the God Helene? I don't think Elrond has died off just yet. This is a really brutal end for the elves here. Mass routing all over the place. The trolls continuing their inexorable advance forwards. This is a very strange defensive position that Horton's taken up. Imladris Guardians are going to try and hold up with the God Helene right there. I'm actually surprised that the Melkor's Chosen didn't notice this and recharge the God Helene. It might have been enough to assassinate Elrond. These Sindar archers. Your dual wielding won't save you now. Blackback Berserkers with their angrier looking dual wielding swords, with their barbs on the end. They're more like axes than swords in many ways. Now then. Retreat, retreat, run for your lives. This is not a fantastic defensive position if I'm honest, because you know the elves are now going to be fighting uphill in addition to fighting against overwhelming odds. Still, the battle goes on for a decent chunk of time longer, so I assume the elves are going to hold their position decently against the forces which are approaching them. The Black Uruk's going to be the first ones in. Again, they won't beat Imladris Guardians, but they'll put up a decent fight. And the God Hellim are going to move forward as well. It's good to be doing scenarios again, though. I like this. I like the map very much, so actually. Hill maps are often a little bit difficult to do because oftentimes it's just you can approach it from any angle and it's a little bit difficult to defend. Hobbiton is a really good example of that. The attackers often win on Hobbiton because it's very difficult to defend in an efficient manner with so many angles of approach that you can take, but this one obviously it does limit that somewhat. It doesn't force the attackers into just one choke point though, so they do have options. This road in particular is the sort of thing which defenders might overlook if they're not careful. And this is it, the front line, as the orcs push forward to destroy the vile elves. A lot of AP polearms on the front line as well, which, again, against Imladris, will help. Happening back here. Oh, the Melkor's Chosen are over here now. Again, if they had gone around and recharged the elves, this battle would probably already be over, in fact. Let's go up to ×2 speed. We all know how this will end. Just look at the amount of orcs just pouring over the hill. These Elven units will put up a real fight, especially the God Hellim because of their multiple HP nature. But ultimately it's not going to be enough. These Troll Drummers have really been very important for the Orcs, keeping all of their units in line. That morale. They could have suffered some more morale shocks had they not been there. Interesting battle. Obviously I feel like I was a little harsh earlier on, but my point still stands. I feel as though, you know, I'm very grateful that he made the scenario and I'm grateful that I can show it, but Horton did not play particularly fantastically in this battle. He was quite wasteful with his ranged power, and his line was very much exploited by the people that attacked first. Second Pink and Tundra's Fox in particular did a very good job at the front there. Tangerine had the unenviable task of going up the best defended choke point, but in the end he did manage to break through, even if it did cost him quite a lot. Donald Kingslayer of course did manage to defend his lines quite well, until later on, when of course things started to get a little bit out of hand with how much of a numbers advantage the Orcs ended up having. And really, Dwelling's army was just the final nail in the coffin there. He had the most elite attacking army. He came forward and there was really nothing that the Elves could do when his army came rolling forth, particularly with units like the Black Legion, proving to be the final nail in the coffin of the initial defence. And the Temple Executioners managed to get on the front line here at the end, and they will be the ones to finish off the Elves. There goes Elrond at the hands of the White Uruks, I believe. White Uruks Fearmongers. I think you can forgive them for that. Only 16 of them left, and I have run out of things to say about the fight. Good map though, as I said before. Look forward to seeing more sort of interesting maps like this, hopefully, as time goes on, because I feel as though variety is quite important. I really would rather not start having my... I was worried about things becoming a little bit samey, but if the scenarios start gathering momentum again, hopefully that won't be the case for a little while yet, especially with the new game mode that I've yet to show off. But hopefully I'll be able to show that off relatively soon. But I am leaving that for the official channel to do first. Seems more appropriate. Come on, Elves, you've lost. You must give in now. This is the end. More Orcs coming down the hill. They're a little bit late to join the party, but Victory for the orcs. And there we go. So, a little bit difficult to see who's who. I would imagine that... You know, I don't really know who's who in terms of the orcs. I would imagine that this top one is Tundra's Fox because he had more men, certainly, than Dwayling. Misty Mountains armies I'm a little less clear on. I mean, if I had to choose, I would imagine that Second Pink got more kills purely because Tangerine had the harder angle of assault. Imladris got more kills, but I feel as though the mistakes were there. They cost the elves a little bit more than Lothlorians, I think. Again, it's possible that I missed stuff, but I still feel as though Imladris' lines could have been so much better than they were. You know, the Imladris army was very elite, more elite than Lothlorians. All that Eldar Enway, the Imladris army's value was extremely high, and I feel as though it could have been used more effectively. Here, though, this is Dwaling's army, and the Black Legion of Barad-dûr getting the most kills, I believe. Most of his army, though, was committed. Actually, no, this is Tundra's Fox. Dwaling, on the other hand, one of his the Black Legion got the most kills. Again, unsurprising. Great shield units like that are fantastic in a situation like this, so that you can bash your way through the enemy lines. You do need to sort of be prepared for that as the elves. If you see the Black Legion coming forward, you need to have some sort of answer for it, whether that be javelins, which can quickly deal a lot of damage to them, or be ready to stack up on your front line with a lot of high damage swordsman units, which can cut their way through Black Legion relatively quickly, especially if they try and force their way through too hastily. But yeah, this was an interesting scenario. I hope you enjoyed it, and there is actually another one that I can do fairly soon as well, so hopefully I'll get that one out fairly soon as well. But I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.